All right. Well, welcome back to the Blueprint Ultra podcast with your host, Steve Epifano and Jeff Winchester. Listen, our goal with this podcast is to help you put together your own plan for your next ultra. We do this by interviewing a variety of guests, such as back of the pack runners, as well as the elite runners. And sometimes we bring in a special guest that has a variety of information that can help you put together your own plan. And so let me just start by saying that you are in for an absolute treat today. Our guest let me say it this way. Our guest ran her first 50 miler back in 2005 and has been part of the ultra running community since that time. She's run other 50Ks and 50 milers since then, but you have probably also seen her as a volunteer at the Western States Michigan Bluff Aid Station. She's been a part of that aid station for the past 16 years, since 2009, if I do my math correctly. She's also volunteered at the Daytona 100. She's also volunteered at the Daytona 100, the Tampa 100, and the Keys 100, and was even out at the Leadville 100 this past year. She is a PT by trade, and she has her doctoral degree in physical therapy, as well as a doctoral degree in education. She is smarter than me and Steve combined. And when you hear some of the words that she uses, as she was talking during our pre-show, you will be pulling out your dictionary and thesaurus like I feel like I need to. She's brilliant, and I believe you're in a treat to kind of learn from her. And on top of all that, she is the co-author of the book, the Bible, the testament that many ultra runners have used over the course of their career, called Fixing Your Feet. And it is on that topic that we want to learn anything and everything that we can from our guest. And so without any more delay, let me at least introduce our guest, Tonya Olson, to the show. Tonya, welcome to the Blueprint Ultra podcast.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here. I have a lot to live up to with that intro.
Okay. No pressure.
Glad
to have you.
You have an incredible resume, so we are excited. Now, before we do get started, I have one more announcement that I need to make, and I need to tell the listeners about it. So if you've been a part of this podcast for any length of time, or even for the past year, hopefully, we are on episode 26, which marks 1 year in production, because we have released this podcast, every 2 weeks. And so episode 26 marks 1 year, and we have brought in Tonya for that. And to mark, though, our celebration, we're going to do a couple giveaways. And the first giveaway that we're going to do is actually just for those who actually listen to the podcast. So we're going to do associate, right, Steve? I know it's going to be my mom and your mom. They're going to be fighting for this, but, maybe that's it. We are obviously going to do a giveaway over social media as well, but instead, this particular giveaway is only for those who listen to the podcast and this particular episode. So for those who are on YouTube, you will see I'm holding up a book called Fixing Your Feet. I think you can see it. This is the book that Tonya is a co-author with her friend, John Vonhoff. And we're giving that away to anyone who will do the following. Really, really simple. I got to look at my notes to make sure I get this right. If you want to win the book, all you have to do is post a story on Instagram telling people about the episode. You don't have to tell them that this is a giveaway. Keep that a secret. But you can tell them about the episode. You can share something maybe that you learned from the episode, maybe a foot story that you personally have, or even a nasty old picture of your own feet where you just feel so inclined. We promise not to sell, right, Steve?
Yeah, we won't sell anything.
Yeah, we won't sell no feet pictures. No. So yeah, make sure you tag us in that picture though, or in that story when you do, and make sure that we are friends and that we're following one another, and that you're not just sharing it to your close friends list. Otherwise, we may not be able to see that either. So do us a favor. Tag us in a story, something about your feet, something about this episode, and you will be eligible to win this book. We're going to be holding the giveaway open until October 17th, so allow 2 weeks for people to listen to the episode. And then on October 18th, we are giving the book away. So I have rambled a lot about it. If you don't understand anything about what I just said, just reach out to me, to Steve, or to our Blueprint Ultra podcast, social media, and we can explain it to you again that you heard it on this episode. So I think that's it. Steve, did I cover it all?
I think you did. We may want to do a Easter egg at the end, so you listen to the whole thing and add that word to your story, so we know you listened to the entire episode.
That is painful.
Oh my God,
it's going to be
Steve.
That will be
rough
easy
for people. Yeah,
Steve, if you forget to give the Easter egg at the end, we won't hold that against them. How about that?
I'm probably going to forget.
Okay, well, Easter egg or not, maybe just say Easter egg in your story.
It's an old school radio format to make sure you get to listen to the rest of the episode.
Well, I have rambled enough, Steve. You and I have both rambled enough, and we need to at least hear from our guest. Tonya, thank you so much for being on the show. Super excited about it. Now, I do want to start with the book. Like we kind of have to start there.
Yeah.
What possessed you to write this book, like to be a part of this book with John? Like how did that co-authoring come about?
It all started a long time ago, and my dad got me a horse. I was in second grade, honest to God. So no hoof, no horse. So I just grew up appreciating foot, hooves, horses. With horses, you end up, you're creating a training plan. You're out in the woods all the time. Stayed out of college to ride horses. Finally ended up going to PT school based on a lot of those experiences. And then, of course, while I was in PT school, I didn't have a horse anymore, and I kind of I had some free time that I'd never had before. So that's how I started running. I started off running marathons, but that interest in biomechanics, movement, the foot ankle complex just migrated over to humans because that's where we were. And then I was living in Bend, Oregon back in like 2007, and a group of the ultra runners there. I was an ultra runner by then. A group of my ultra running friends were going down to Western States, and I decided to tag along. And I asked Sean Meisner, who was on the original Montrail running team, which is old school ultra running. I said, Sean, what do you think I should do? Like, because I wasn't crew or anything. He goes, go to Michigan Bluff, hang out with John. And so I just drove to Michigan Bluff and walked up to the medical station. And I was just like, hi, is there a John Von Hoff here? And that's where it all started. And John and I were just simpatico from we were elbows deep in feet for the next, 10 years. Every year it states, he's a pioneer himself. And when it was time for him to kind of write the next edition, which this latest edition is the 7th, he invited me in as a co-author. So that's a long answer to a short question, but that's how it happened. Kind of fate in Western States and feet brought us together.
I actually think the horse analogy is great because if we have people who have pets or even people who take care of their kids, right? They always take care of their pets and kids better than they take care of themselves. You know what I mean?
100%.
Right? So if you have a horse, you're definitely making sure they are shoed correctly. Their hooves are in perfect condition. Their legs are in perfect condition. And then when you're out running, you're like, everything hurts, but I think I'll be okay.
And what's really funny is that with runners, it's the exact opposite. They ignore their feet.
Yep, 100%.
Their feet aren't even on the list.
It's like the last thing. It's the last thing on the list.
We knew. And they're your transportation, like for gear. Don't even get me started. But what also is kind of cool is because the history of Western States, it was an outcropping of the Tevis Cup 100-mile endurance ride for horses. So that race itself has a horse background. It's pretty cool. Yeah. And so kind of random. Have you guys seen the book that the co-founder of Western States wrote? Oh my God, hang on. Hang on. 1 second. Hold, please. Oh my God, I know myself. I'm always promoting other people. So,
horses in the background
too. Shannon Weil wrote this book, Buckle Fever, and it came out this year at States, and it's the history of the race. It's super.
That's really
don't
cool.
Get scared. It tells a story about just yes, it's not super thick, but it's anyone who has any interest in ultra running should read this book.
Well, so for those listening, they may not have caught all that. That was called, the name of that book that Tonya is now promoting is Buckle Fever, written by Shannon Weil, and it's Weil is how you spell her last name. Yep. And so I'm giving away Fixing Your Feet. Are you giving away that book?
Oh my gosh,
I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. Look at all the pressure on her face. She's like, what?
All I have is the one that Shannon signed for me. So.
No, I'm kidding with you. So what we really wanted to do, though, Tonya, like you said earlier, too, that feet are probably one of the most neglected tools that ultra runners have, that they take care of, that they think about, that we tend to only think about them, I guess, I'll confess. We often only think about our feet when either we're injured or we have a problem within a race. And so what we thought about when it comes to this podcast today, or this show, is we like to structure the conversation around 3 different areas, right? The first area that we want to dig into is preparation and prevention and things that we can do to prepare our feet for a race, but also things that maybe when it comes to shoe style or things that apply to our foot care going into our training that would apply to prevention and prep. Then talking about race day events itself, like what could go wrong? What do you do when this happens? So we want to talk about that as well. And then at the end, we want to dig into a little bit more about recovering stuff. You don't have to take notes on this. I will have it all down and we'll kind of go to it. But
Okay.
to give you and our listeners a framework of where we want to go, that's the arc that we want to spend time in each of these areas. And so if you're listening to the podcast, you're thinking, I really want to learn about what happens during the middle of my race when I have a blister or whatever takes place. We're going to get to that. Or if you want to hear about how do you recover from something, we're going to get to that. But first, we want to dig into before the race. What are things that are going on? And so the first thing I have a race coming up in a week and a half from when we're recording this. We're recording this on September 18th. I am running the Yeti 100 on September 26th. So in 8 days. Steve has got the Mammoth 200 coming up in a week as well. Yep. And so he and I are both running 2 massive races. So with that in mind, what is the ideal foot and toenail health we should have going into our race?
I mean, okay, I'm like, all right, so you want to reduce any chance of tissue injury. So if you file down your calluses, and for you, this is perfect because about a week out is good because if you're too aggressive and things can kind of grow back. So calluses, you don't have, you want to have your calluses have a nice, low profile. They don't have to be completely gone, but you need to have those calluses down. And then for toenails, well, I mean, if you pay some attention to them, that would be great because that would be an improvement. But ideally, you want them flat across the top and short. And just like and short is like toe anatomy is different for like people have different shaped toes. And so short means different things to different foot shape or toe shape. But the crowning or the pro tip is for you file across, right? So it's to get it shorter, but you want to also file lengthwise. So that you're functionally shortening the toenail, which if you file lengthwise, like the tip, with the goal of when you run your finger up toward, from the tip of the toe back to your foot, you don't feel a leading edge. That can reduce the chance of a ton of different problems. So when you thin down the last little part of the nail, you're functionally shortening it and you're making it thinner. So a lot of toenail injuries happen because the nail, you kick a rock and then the nail just gets torn up off the base and jammed into the cuticle. And that's super painful. That's where you get like the big blood blister underneath. Or it can be because your toes move in the shoe. It can be just with every step getting kind of lifted. And if the end of the toenail is flexible, then just that little end part is going to move instead of having that cumulative trauma or that wrenching of if you have an acute episode of like kicking a rock, you're going to be less likely to pull that nail up and away from the base. So those are, again, long answer, short question, but
no, that's perfect.
Those 2 things can save you a lot of trouble.
Well, I think that's a great answer. And so let's stay on the first half of your answer, and that's the topic of calluses, because that is a very common question that I get asked. My wife asked me about my feet. Like that's a conversation that shows up like with athletes I work with, that Steve works with just random runners out on social media, is the idea that some callus is better than no callus. Is that true? Or should we keep our feet super moisturized? Should I go get a pedicure? Like how soft do I need to make the toesies?
Well, so here's the reason for so a callus is actually information upon which you can base a lot of decisions or do a fair amount of problem solving. Like myself, when I see a callus, like I have a whole list of things that I know are causing it. But a callus is information. It's telling you that spot in your foot is getting extra friction. and that somehow the way that you're moving, the way that the shoe fits, that you're getting more pressure there. And then that can be informative on how to pick a better shoe, work on some different strengthening exercises so that you're moving a little bit more true. Because if you're rotating, if you're having like lateral movements while you're running, you're not as efficient. That's kind of a short answer to that. So a callus is information. And so during training, the calluses are padding that area because it's basically the skin, just kind of like an oyster. You know, they get like a piece of sand, the oyster gets a piece of sand in it, and then it creates the pearl by coating that irritating piece of sand. So a callus is just more layers of that top layer of skin, which is the epidermis, which is comprised completely of dead cells. So that's information for you to know. I'm getting extra pressure here. So during training, they're usually don't cause much. They're protective. But when you're doing a race that is longer than your training and you're going to be out there for longer, a callus is more of a liability than a protection because, here we go. I'm such a nerd.
I am like fascinated right now
already. Yeah.
I'm just going to, I was trying to, I'm just going to go with it. Okay.
Go with it.
So so tissue breakdown happens. So I have to explain different types of forces so that we understand the terms and kind of what I'm talking about. So friction is like two things moving against each other in a parallel fashion. Like your toes are right next to each other and they can be moving forward and back or kind of up and down. But it's more of a parallel and kind of more of a light is happening. And then so that's two things moving parallel is friction. Shear is one thing moving against something that does not move. And that's where calluses can become a problem. A callus, when the 250,000 sweat glands that you have on each of your foot are pumping out sweat for the hours and hours and hours that you're out on the trail, that callus will get waterlogged. And when skin gets waterlogged, what does it do? Especially if it's skin that has thick epidermis, like your feet and on your fingers, that skin swells and wrinkles. So now that callus is taking up more, it's macerated is the technical term for that. It's taking up more space, and a callus by nature has a rougher profile, rougher exterior. So now that callus is taking up more space and it's going to rub because it's there because there's rubbing or friction that's happening. So now it's going to start moving, but it's moving on the bone underneath. And guess what's trapped in between the callus and the bone? The dermis, which is the underneath part of the skin. It's the red part that's exposed when you have a blister and the top breaks. The dermis is where the nerves and the blood vessels are. So blood blisters happen when the callus is moving, as that shearing forces are being imparted onto trapping the dermis between the bone. And we all know that a blood blister, because it's damaging the dermis, the chance of that being a painful blister that will affect how you are running and the outcome of your race, that's the reason to have your calluses under control for your race. And ideally, you're managing them, because just hacking them, like letting them grow, for me, if somebody's getting a lot of callus in one particular area, I'm wired to figure out the cause and address it. A lot of people just think, well, that's just how it is. Well, I kind of disagree. There's things that you can do to have you be running in a little bit more, have your foot be moving in a little bit more of a true fashion. And so, leaving that callus just be gargantuan, and then like a week out, like taking a hacksaw to it, like that's just, now you're asking for trouble too. Like, for one, if you go to get a pedicure, that poor pedicurist is like, well, and then you can create an injury. So if you just manage the calluses, you just have less work to do before a big race. But that's why And there are people, there's not a one size all fits all, but I think, my platform is explaining the why to people and then they can make a better decision. Some people, they feel like their calluses are their superpower and it makes their foot really tough. Well, more power to you. If it's been proven and you've done all the things and they've never acted up, you've never had any trouble. But I'll tell you, if I had a chance to reduce the chance of having a painful blood blister, that also takes a lot longer to heal than a surface blister. I'm going to take it. And so with that said, if you're taking the callus away, you're removing that protective layer that's there for a reason, correct? So then always tape over that area to protect it during the race. So if you cut it off, then you need to tape it up. Does that make sense? So because it's making that tissue a little bit more, you're kind of creating a little bit of vulnerability when you're taking the callus off.
I think that's an excellent point. I want to kind of stay there because, and it evolves to some of our other questions here on the same preventative standpoint, is because we want to talk about taping versus lubricating, if you will, right? I use like squirrel nut butter or salty bricks. There's other products that people use other than tape. And so I think the counter argument a lot of people have had is that they want to keep their callus because they think it prevents that blister, right? Because of what you're saying is that you now are removing that protective layer. But what you're saying, I've actually experienced a blood blister underneath a callus on the middle of my foot on the bottom during a race. It's super painful. And you can't really do much with it because it's underneath that callus. Right.
Yeah, can't get to it.
We were stuck with it because you can't get to it. And so what you're saying makes a lot of logical sense. And I do think a lot of listeners argue with themselves about, is the callus helpful or not? And one of the things that you said I thought was fantastic is where you really got myself to lean in. And I think even you, Steve, is when you said that in training, a lot of times you keep your calluses and you keep them at a little bit lower level. But during a race, before your race, you really want to remove it as much as possible, not raw skin here. We're not talking about that, right? We're not doing that. But to reduce down that profile, like you said, prior to race, because the length of the race is longer than what we're used to in training. And we don't think in terms of that. We think it's been our superpower, like you said, and it should make us ready for race day. So I will be giving my feet some love tonight after this is over. That being said,
what I took away from that, Jeff, too, was that your calluses are the oyster of your feet. Or sorry, the pearl of your feet. They're the pearl of your feet. Because it gives you the information to figure out what's going wrong. If it's the shoes, socks, and then also how to deal with them.
Yeah.
I like that too, because you did use this term information, and like Steve, what you're saying, I agree. It's more of the fact that we as runners need to be participants in our foot care, not responding to our problems. We need to kind of pay attention to the callus being informative, as you said. I like that a lot. Like we really just say, what do I need to do? And we just kind of do it as opposed to thinking about why am I in this situation in the first place?
Yeah, what is it telling me?
Right.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Like, if somebody, 100%. Like, because there's not a hard and fast, there's general, I've been doing this long enough. There's general rule of thumb strategies that are the kind of a framework to work within. But I just feel passionately that if you educate people about the causes and the variables that are contributing to whatever it is happening, then they can make the best decision for themselves. So maybe, Jeff, you love your calluses and you don't care that the people around you have to look at your feet when you're wearing sandals, and whatever, and you're proud of them and they have never caused you any trouble. That's great. It works for you, but you cannot impose your viewpoint or your belief system about your calluses that work for you upon somebody else. Yeah. And so I like people to have the freedom to just figure it out themselves. Like, so if they go in informed and they say, you know what, I feel like my callus is a superpower and it's protective. So I'm going to do this long race that of a big distance I've never done before. I'm going to leave it. And that way you're making an informed decision. And then if something goes south, then they know why, so they can address it in a more efficient manner because hopefully they were prepared. And then you're learning from it. Does that make sense? Like, if something goes sideways with your nutrition, you just go you're not like, oh, I guess I'm never eating a banana again.
I think what happens there is that people think that blood blister or whatever, they may not know it's because of the callus. They may think it's because of my shoe or my sock or whatever. And they're like, they don't know how to deduct some of that. And I think it takes multiple learning opportunities.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, some people just really need that. And I will tell you, the one thing, and it absolutely breaks my heart, especially now, like at States, it's so hard to get into there. I always tear up when I say the most common thing people say to me who are running like the race of their life, they spend years trying to get into it. They sit down in the chair and they say, well, this never happened in training. Their feet are trashed. Now their race isn't going to be what they trained for it. They spent all this money, all these years trying to get in, and it's gone sideways because of something that is largely preventable with just a tiny bit of thinking, a tiny bit of education. And it breaks my heart. Even like, cause as the years have gone, like 10,000 people tried to get into Western States this year, and there's only 369 spots, and it just every year. So a little bit of information can save you a lot of trouble.
Yeah. The reason I'm running the Yeti this year is so that I can get my 6th year of eligibility to come see you at Michigan Bluff.
Oh my gosh, that would be so fantastic.
Wouldn't that be awesome?
Oh,
and then you can yell at me about my
no.
callous feet.
You will be dialed in like a boss.
So let's talk about that again, because let's assume that we have shaved our calluses down, and you said that we should tape. There is a debate between Steve and I on this. I don't tape. Steve tapes. Steve runs 200-mile races. I don't. I run 100-mile races. What do you find to be I don't know how to ask the question, because I don't believe there's one necessarily better than the other. I think one may offer more long-term protection. Is that true? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, I mean, they're just people are different. Like how they move, how they train, the conditions they train in. So there's a lot of variables that contribute to whether or not people have foot issues. There's strength, mobility issues that strongly contribute and put people at risk for foot issues. For the longer you're out on a trail or a course, the longer you're out, the more chance for skin breakdown on your feet. So for a 200 miler, you're better off. It's a better strategy to tape at some point. Some people like to tape from the start. And ideally, you kind of know your trouble spots. And basically, if you've ever had an injury somewhere, tape it, protect it, because you know that's a spot that's likely to get re-injured. So just be informed. And so the 200 milers, you're out there for so much longer. And so the cumulative effect, like there's some of the foot care strategies, it's more of a cumulative effect. It's not just like a one thing that it's addressing. So over time, and then the amount of time you have to spend messing with your feet is reduced if you've got tape on it. And so really the answer to that question is often it depends. It depends on a bunch of different things. So if tape works for you, Jeff, then you tape. If you don't feel like you need to tape, then don't. And so, and if your theory has been proven, but I would say hold on loosely to your ideology, because if you step up to the 200-mile distance, like you're going to be wanting to follow the advice of the people who've done it before, and you may want to use, because a 100 is a miles, and the time you're out on a 100 miler and the time you're out on a 200 miler is significantly different. So the trauma to your cumulative trauma to the foot skin is very, very different. So putting in more proactive or preventive measures is generally a better idea. So for you, 100 milers, if you don't need to tape, and because if the conditions of a 100 miler are going to be very different than what you run in, if you typically run in like really dry terrain, dry, flat, a whole lot of continuity, that's very different than going and running in the Pacific Northwest in the mountains where it's wet and more technical terrain, and you're having more climbing and descending. And so those are different stressors on the feet. So those are some of the things to be considering. And like you said, as you get more experience, you get more information about, oh man, I've never had a hot spot here, but I've never run in these kind of mountains for this long. And so if you've got the ability to address things on the fly, that's ideal. So that's just all information to kind of pay attention to. There's not a one size or a one strategy that works. You still have to think about things.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Like, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I can't just give you a prescriptive. I know people just want to
That's
say,
perfect.
"Oh, I always do the one thing." Well, you know,
No,
if you're doing something different, you may have to open your mind. You might need to try something different based on information, not just conjecture
Right.
or just because Susie's doing it. And
I feel like it's much like nutrition, where you have to have a lot of things in your quiver, a lot of things in your toolbox to rely on, because if one thing's not working, you know that you have X, Y, and Z to go to. Same.
it's
I know
100%. That's my. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I know that now, like I usually tape where my calluses are previously and where I know hot spots generally come up. Now I'll be adding in filing down a little bit of the calluses before I tape to the race and see how that does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm always like, the example I always with feet is like, people have like, they have their contingency plan for hydration and nutrition from like A to Z. And then they have no plan at all for their feet, like none, like not even one thing. Like they're not even on the list. They roll into Western states like holes in their socks. Like what?
So that's interesting.
It's shocking. Shocking.
I find it interesting because like I don't have blisters anymore. I used to experience them. I've changed some of the things the way I lube my feet and my socks, my shoes, and all those types of things, and how I tie my shoes. Like I've tried different things, and so I don't really have blisters anymore. And so I will confess that I rest on what I did early on to deal with my blisters. In other words, if I have a blister kit, if something happens, I'm going to do this type of maintenance to it and that kind of thing. But do I have a plan beyond that? No. And that's a problem.
Well, I don't know, because
you could say it's a problem.
well, no, because what you just said is that you've learned through experience, and you have a critical thinking logarithm in your mind. You've identified a problem, you've problem solved, and you've chosen the solution, you've tested the solution. And so you have the supplies that you need. Like, so you actually have the basis of like you have the basis of a solid foot care strategy, as evidenced by you referring to blisters in the past tense.
Yeah.
Which is pretty great. And I love that. You just told me you were thinking about your feet. And so
that's true.
I would hesitate to say that I would just give you a little bit more credit and say your current strategy is not dogma. It's a tried and true.
Mm-hmm.
It's a strategy that you've worked towards, and it works for you, and you know that, and you know why.
But you did give the nugget that if my terrain changes significantly, I need to relook at my foot care. And I think that's something that I haven't considered, because most of my races are pretty similar. And so I think that's valid, and that's how I learned how to tie my shoes, is at a race that had some incline in it, and I realized my feet are sliding in my foot. My feet are sliding my shoes too much. But anyway, couple rapid fire questions for you, because I really want to hit some of these. You have been at Michigan Bluff Aid Station for 16 years. You guys tape feet there.
Yes.
What is the product that you use?
Oh, well, I use a kinesiology type tape, and that's like the foot care kit has the kinesiology type tape. We have Cover Roll, which is the white tape. It's a real thin. It's actually made for adhering dressings and wound care. That's what we use, like between the toes, to anchor the ball of the foot tape down. You've probably seen it in like the videos and that kind of thing. We're going to use it like the skin barrier ointment. We don't use a lot of that at Michigan Bluff because we're halfway through the race. And if they're stopping, we're usually adding tape. And so what's interesting is I actually use, in that setting, if I'm going to use a skin barrier, like an ointment, which the old school term is lube, but I like to have a little bit more accuracy in the terminology. So the skin, so squirrel's nut butter is readily available. Salty britches is, those are my two kind of the favorites. Those are the two really high quality products on the market. But actually, what I use more at Michigan Bluff, or if I'm in the middle or towards the end of a race where I'm volunteering, I will use Blister Shield powder. Because by the time they get to me at the Bluff, their feet the skin is macerated. The skin has been wet. The skin has been bathed in the sweat that the 250,000 sweat glands per foot has been pumping out for however many hours it took to get there. And so usually I'm trying to dry the skin and then fix the problem. So this year was amazing. We've been able to take foot care to a whole nother level at Michigan Bluff. And it's really in response to how much this matters to the runners. Like in the early years, we would just kind of cut stuff when the runner was sitting there, and I'm like, this isn't efficient. And so then we started pre-cutting tape, and then so the pre-cutting has been a thing now for a long time. But I had enough skilled foot care people this year that we were able to have like 2 people per runner for the majority of people who came in, and we could really work on getting them out really fast. And so between 6 and 16 minutes was the amount of time that people were spending in the chair. We're trying to get that down to as little as possible. And they were being super efficient. Like the crew was doing they're eating. And we had 2 people, one gal, the 6-minute gal, she actually had multiple things going on. We have 3 people working on her. And it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool to get people just out of a chair.
Yeah.
So the first thing I do when somebody, especially if it's during a race, first thing I do when they sit down, you get your shoes off. While I'm taking the shoes and socks off, I'm talking to them as their crew. Ideally, they're bringing what they have, what they need, or they're going and getting it. But the runner sits down, and I'm asking them questions. So I'm assessing cognition. I'm assessing, you can tell by how somebody's responding, whether they're dehydrated, whether they're behind in calories or fluid. And so foot care actually at a race is more, we're triaging and we're assessing. It's much more of a skill than just putting tape. And so shoes off, and then I just lather it with hand sanitizer. Because hand sanitizer is 72% alcohol. And so now I've cleaned off the foot, and then the one I'm not working on is just drying. It's drying in the open air. And then the one I'm working on, all the skin that, so then I'm attending to whatever. And so usually being wet is the main problem that they're coming in with. So I'll usually at the Bluff, I'll tape, and then the crew will be putting Blister Shield in the sock more often than not. But for the early in the race, it's squirrel's nut or a salty britches, a skin barrier to prevent maceration. So does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Steve, you have a board that you were going to ask about.
Oh, yeah. I even forget what it's called, but it's like an ankle board that you stand on, and it has planes of motion laterally and back and forth to strengthen the feet. I see it pop up on Instagram all the time.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to see if...
I know what it's called, yeah.
Does it work? Or is it just in my algorithm? And like, are there other exercises where I can do that instead of standing on this board that I can get for $30-$40?
Yeah, I think it's a gadget. It's a gimmick. Some people swear, but I'm not a gimmicky, gadgety, trendy person. I can see why it was invented and why it's popular in America in particular. We tend to we're always attracted to that shiny thing, that new shiny thing.
Yeah.
And then we're also trying to cut corners instead of just, it's just, it really is culturally trying, how do I cut corners? Yeah. So those are, those seem like it would work for you, and it kind of, if it encourages you to move your foot and do things because it's like a shiny thing, and you're a gadget person, and you're not going to do anything otherwise, then by all means. But something like that, it actually is. Here we go.
Do it.
Your foot is actually more passive with a gadget like that, or even if you're on a foam pad, I mean, this is a whole big long conversation, but like really like learning how to volitionally control your foot, like by lifting your arch and spreading your toes, moving your big toes separate from your little toes, keeping the ball of your foot, like the metatarsal heads, flat on the ground, and then having your toes, when you come up on your toes and you do like a heel raise or calf raise, having your toes not do anything weird like curl and having your toes stay flat. That's all like neurological connections that are more intentional than standing on something that's wiggling. Like,
Got it.
does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
that's my PT, my PT mindset is like that you can just be standing on that and you're not improving the neurological connection to the extent that, because it's more of a passive, your foot's
It's like a reactionary.
Yeah, your foot is responding to the thing collapsing underneath it, I've the barefoot movement with people happened 2010. What's crazy is that it had happened 10 years prior. The exact same thing had happened with horses. It's a whole story, but so they've done a bunch of research and what has been proven, and this is a little bit nerdy, but we're gonna hello,
We're
you got
there.
me?
Go
Hello,
there. We're
guys.
there.
So here's the thing. I'm a skeptic. You probably are noticing. I'm a little bit, like, show me the data, blah, blah, blah. So when that barefoot movement happened, we called it, when changing how you run is really not in your best interest. Changing your form, you've been moving that way since you learned how to walk, and making big changes like trying to volitionally change from a forefoot striker or from a heel striker to a forefoot striker is really asking to get new injuries. And so we called it, what do we call anyone who had like a barefoot movement related injury? I would call it the BTR syndrome. Born to run syndrome.
Yeah.
There's
gotcha.
a complex of injuries that, because people would change, they read the book and they would get all inspired to move differently because like there were some things that were really pushed pretty strongly in the book that were not necessarily based in science. So I'd be like, I got 3 BTR syndromes today. And then you help the person and the pendulum swings. You go one direction a little too much, another too much. But what we learned, the Spalding Running Center based in Boston, I went to this a long time ago. I went to a conference and I always forget her name. I want to call her Elaine, but I'm probably wrong. She'd done some really good research because I'm like, how is training the tiny little muscles in your feet going to really change how you run? Like, seriously, let's just be real. Well, here's the thing, and this is where physical therapy lives. We live more in the neurology of things, but here's what happens. There were some really good studies and they've been done multiple times and confirmed. They took runners who had like foot, ankle, calf, whatever problems, taught them how to lift their arch. It's called doming or the short foot exercise. I'll have to put it up on my YouTube page or whatever. When a runner learns when a person learns how to volitionally control a body part, that body, there's a body part space on your brain, your motor cortex, the surface of your brain. There's a little piece of your brain that's connected to every single body part. And the more you use that body part, the bigger that space gets. So if you're a violinist, your right hand has, like if you're in an MRI, that the right hand space on the motor cortex is bigger and lights up more ferociously because it has more active connections. So that's what's happening with the foot strengthening. So they taught the runners how to lift their arch, and they did the arch lifting protocol over the space of 6 weeks. And then you saw the runners then running on the treadmill. And interestingly enough, they maintained their arch to a higher degree than they had when they started the experiment. And it's not because those tiny little foot muscles were holding your whole entire body up. because that's not possible.
Yeah.
It's because of this synergy of the $2 word is motor pattern. So when you learn how to lift your arch, that means all the muscles in your leg up to your lower abdominal muscles light up as well. So your foot, if your foot is an active participant when you're running, rather than just a passive, a lot of people are running and their foot is just slapping against the ground. It's not active. It doesn't have the neurological connection that other people have. And so if your foot is active when you're moving, that means your entire leg is more active. And if your entire leg is more active and the muscles are being recruited in a proper motor pattern or the proper synergy, then your leg is going to be more aligned in a more efficient manner. And if, for example, your knee is going to be less likely to be dropping in, which is the source of a lot of trouble for folks, for injuries. So that's a long answer to a really good question. And so anyhow, that's.
Go ahead, Steve.
I love that. Yeah, if you could send me that, then I'll do that instead of.
Yes, 100%. I'll send that. Yeah, it'll be because then I will feel better knowing that because one of my mentors when I was riding horses, Violet Hopkins, she would say, "It's not practice makes perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect." I'd roll my teenager eyes behind her back and. Yeah. Well, I just, because then I would feel better knowing that you're doing it well because you have high standards.
That's
Certainly
fantastic.
do.
Yeah.
No, I think that's really good. And so no fancy gadgets because we're all lazy is my take home point. And to understand that when we're talking about volition, you're talking about just making sure that we are taking control of our actions or our movements. In other words, controlled movement is really what this is about, that we are forcing the controlled movement or creating controlled movement. Excuse me.
Yeah. And being informed about the why. Like, why am I doing this? What is the,
I've had way too much PT. Yeah, I've had way too much PT in my own past.
Okay.
And when you talked about the toes crimping up, the biggest thing that the PT folks that I work with and have worked with me, if they're listening, they're probably thinking, I swear this guy will never get this solved. Because, in PT world, we still struggle to do what you guys tell us to do.
Oh, 100%.
Right. And so everybody listening is like, that's right, I've gone to a PT and they didn't help me. And the truth could be that we just didn't do what we were supposed to do. But beside the point, so I have this claw that takes place. Anytime I try to do a squat and a lunge, my PTs would laugh at me. They're like, "What? You've got to ground yourself, lift your arches, ground yourself, flatten your toes, or extend your toes, like spread them. You're not trying to hold onto the earth." Like I literally, and so that causes problems when I run, because by default, every time I land on the ground, I don't realize I'm doing it, but I'm kind of digging in to the earth, even inside my shoes. And so that's something I work on too. So I appreciate you saying that this is about some exercise and things we do to take control of it.
Yes. And that is probably that kind of foot morphology and movement pattern is overrepresented in people who have chronic foot issues because their metatarsals, their toes are actually extended, their toes claw. But here's fun fact. One of the first things I learned in PT school is when you have somebody come lift up on their toes and their toes dig under the ground, that's an indicator of calf weakness.
Mm-hmm. Which is where I want to go.
And imbalance. And so that's remediable. Like that can be, but I think you pointed out something that is not talked about enough, is that the toes are moving in the shoe and you need to figure out what's happening in there, because that's a source of a lot of issues.
Yeah. So that brings me to the reason I discovered this about myself being a problem is I dealt with for years, and I haven't dealt with it now probably for 5 years, but I dealt in the early part of my running career with plantar fasciitis.
Oh yeah.
It was a nightmare. And so everyone's like, you need to do, your calf stretching on stuff, which is, still often one of the preventative type exercises you have to do. But what I have found is that my ankle mobility, as well as my foot strength and what I can do with my toes and with my arch of my foot, really drove most of my plantar fasciitis problems. What do you think is one of the primary reasons so many people struggle with PF, and what can they do about it?
Yeah.
Good luck, right?
Very interesting that I am actually, I would say I'm a specialist in plantar fasciitis, and it's really plantar fasciosis. It's the changing of the plantar fascia. It's happening because of load. The
Mm.
tissue has been overloaded. Because think about it. You've been walking around your whole life, and then your plantar fascia doesn't start barking at you until you started becoming a runner. So it's an indicator. So, like I always tell people, if you go to a professional to be treated for your plantar fascia problem, and they do not ask you detailed questions about your training program, you need to fire them. They're not the person for you. And I don't mean to sound like a jerk, but they're just not. They're not looking at they're not looking at you as they're not considering all the variables. So it's too much too fast, and so you have to figure out what was too much too fast. And you're 100% right. The ankle mobility is a strong contributor to foot, ankle, calf issues, because tissue, or like muscles, they're built to generate the most force when they're at mid-range of their stretch. So if they're at the end range and they're at their longest part, that stress, when they try to contract, is going to be transported over to like the musculotendinous unit, and then that's going to be like Achilles, or it's going to be transferred to the fascia because the muscles aren't able to create the force because they're lengthened. They're in a lengthened position when they're being asked to contract, and that is really, really common in men. Because men in general, like junior high, high school, at some point, y'all go through a bigger growth spurt than a typical woman or girl will go through. And the bones grow faster than the muscles. So now you lost all your calf mobility. And unless you're riding horses where you got to have your heels down and you're stretching all that out on a daily basis. And then you choose sports that are power based, not mobility based. And so you're doing sports where your foot is at neutral at the most. And so then, in your 20s, and especially your teens and your 20s, you can get away with anything. And then you get into your 30s, and that's when tissues start getting a little bit more like the mobility issues start kind of creeping up. Then you add load onto those tissues where you have decreased mobility. Decreased mobility impairs strength, because if your calf is at a lengthened position when your foot hits the ground, when your heel hits the ground, it can't generate force. So then then your ankle can't bend up, like in dorsiflexion is the term where when your toes are coming up. So if your ankle's not moving through full mobility, the tissues adaptively shorten because they're not being asked to be long. And so a really good example of what's happening to the toes, it's when you have what you're talking about, that clawing, you have the neurology, which is a neurological habit. Your brain has trained, for multiple reasons, multiple variables, has trained your foot to move like that. And so there you've got the neurological piece. You have the muscle strength piece, and then you have the mobility piece. And so the easiest way to kind of explain what's happening in your shoe, if you kind of for the podcast listeners, if you take your hand and your thumb towards you, like going to suck your thumb, I guess, maybe, or whatever. I don't know. But anyhow. And then you just relax your fingers. And
we're going to do this with you.
So relax your fingers, and then cock your hand back, your wrist back. What happens to your fingers? They come closer to your palm.
Right.
So if you don't have a lot of mobility in the calf musculature and the foot musculature, this is what's happening, is your toes are being pulled into a bent position because you don't have the soft tissue extensibility available. And that's one of the variables. Does that make sense? So it's multivariant. But if you don't have the tissue, if you don't have the mobility, your toes have no choice but to come in, to curl under. Because and here's the thing where that born to run kind of got us into a little bit of trouble. When your foot is flat on the ground, your ankle is at 90 degrees. In the PT world, we call that neutral. You need to have another 10 degrees of flex up to have full ankle mobility, especially if you're running on hills. If you don't have that mobility, that's where you get that soft tissue pulling your your toes into a flexed position or a curled position. So the advent of the lower drop shoes has compounded those issues for folks who have the mobility limitation, strength limitation, neurological limitations. Because if you a lower drop shoe should be chosen for somebody who has a lot of ankle mobility. It requires a lot of ankle mobility, especially if you're running on hills. And that's a variable that is not really considered. So if the heel is lower, it requires your ankle to flex up more. So long answer to the plantar fascia question, I'm looking at all those variables, like what caused this? And it's usually a trifecta. It's like the person had calf weakness, and weakness just means just not the strength they need for what they're doing. Like, it doesn't mean you're like puny little calves. It's just, in your case, like if you don't have full ankle mobility and those muscles can't actually generate, and they're not at mid length when you're trying to toe off, those muscles go to sleep because they can't work. So they actually quit working. They quit firing. And side note, when I lived in Eugene, Oregon, a long time ago, I worked at this high level outpatient clinic, and we were the exclusive PT providers to the Oregon Track Club, and they were the feeder team for the Nike athletes. And it was really, really cool. What was cool about working there is we had quite a lot of equipment. We had a pressure sensitive treadmill. We had a flat screen TV. In 2010, that was a big deal. We had, motion sensitive, motion analysis software, but we also had surface EMGs. So we could put the sensors on a muscle group and you could see the electrical output of that muscle. And it was really powerful. It would confirm our diagnostics. So I would do some special tests and say, oh, it looks like your left calf is firing better than your right. So we need to get your right calf kind of firing a little bit better. That's contributing to whatever's going on. And then you could put the surface EMGs on and then have it on the flat screen in a graph, like a graph, kind of like an EKG. And so you'd have the right calf and the left calf, and you just tell the runner, after you did some neurological, like neuromuscular re-education is kind of the term, where you taught the person, this is the muscle you need to turn on, and this is how you turn it on, and then this is what it feels like when you turn it on, and then you there's a process to have it increase the complexity, but then the final part of it, you put them on the treadmill, and then you'd have them looking at that graph. And you'd be like, make that one look like that one. So you'd have the one that's firing normally and then the one that's not firing as much. So you have that decreased neural input that's happening to a muscle that is in a position where it just can't fire properly. That's not like a complicated answer to a simple question. So there's not a one fix. I think the biggest mistake people make with plantar fascia is they don't figure out what caused it. They don't address all the variables. They just change one variable and then they wonder why it doesn't happen. And there was a third thing, but I completely lost it. But they're not looking at it from a multivariate perspective and addressing all the variables. They're just doing one thing and then wondering why it's not working.
So I'm going to confess real quick. When I had it, I went through the PT experiences. I went through multiple PTs. I did acupuncture. I did all these types of things to try to bless. I did a lot. A lot of them gave me good relief. None of them solved my problem.
100%.
What I found was, I even bought like the different tools and stuff you could buy online and everything, but did it for over a year. And I landed on, my issue was I was and I'm going to talk about shoes, and please forgive me, all the brands who don't sponsor us anyway. I was wearing Brooks Glycerin that had a 15 millimeter drop. And then I had tried to go to Ultras, who had a 0 millimeter drop. And so my solution ended up being, what I eventually landed on was that I just need to wear Hoka Cliftons with a 5 millimeter drop. And that gave me the perfect thing. And when I started wearing those, my plantar fasciitis eventually went away, but it took me a year to solve that. Here's the mistake I have made, is my solution was only just finding another shoe that would allow me to match the type of ankle mobility that I currently had. And so I never actually addressed the problem of ankle mobility and that to me is the underlying reason. And so I think the shoes, I think that what you talked about can contribute, but it doesn't really solve our problem unless we look at the physical side of it and some of the mechanical sides that we personally have as people that aren't necessarily just because of your shoe. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a multivariant problem. And here's the thing, and I hate to throw the wrench in your
That's okay.
thoughts here, but the average lifespan of plantar fasciosis or itis is about a year. So the Cliftons may have done nothing. Because
here's my
counter
counter to that.
It was gonna, and it probably did something, but it gets better eventually if you do nothing. It's when it recurs is when you know that you're not addressing the causative variable.
But here's how I know. Wait, let me interrupt
yes.
you. We're gonna debate this a little because this is helpful for me. I actually know how to exacerbate it and to prevent it. So what I realized is that as I was trying to recover, and I was still running, right? Because, you break all your rules. You keep running. At some point
you need to keep running with PF.
Well, I did. The
100%.
problem is that I realized if I took off too fast or if I tried to get on trails or if I did anything that was quick propulsion, right, where I had to do a push off, that shift really was causing me to pull that fascia underneath my foot more. And so I actually spent probably months trying to run flat-footed, like to prevent any kind of bending, which made it another problem. But I learned that there was even the way that I would kind of push off would kind of exacerbate the problem because I didn't have that type of mobility, what you're talking about. I didn't classify it that way. But so, I mean, I don't know. It's a nightmare to me. I am terrified to ever experience it again. But my solution has been I've been in Hoka Cliftons for the past 4 years.
Yeah. Okay.
That's not great.
So it wasn't the push off that was doing it for you because that's your ankle. It was the landing before it. That it's that elastic extension.
Okay.
But here's the thing is, the other thing that folks, and so I'm really glad you figured it out. And that's fantastic. Yeah. Well, you've had, but it's really common to flare stuff up like that. And so here's the other thing that, like, especially in my profession, like the problem with research is that it's a lot of time you've got a heterogeneous, meaning a varied patient population. They're in different phases of healing. And then they're trying to test like a treatment. And so you'll have people, there's different phases of plantar fasciosis. And the worst thing you can do is rest. The absolute worst thing that you can do as a runner when you get injured is to rest. Because tissue, it's Wolff's law is technically, tissue adapts to the stress applied.
Mm-hmm.
So connective tissue that doesn't have a lot of extensibility has a lot of collagen fibers like tendons and plantar fascia. When they're healing, they need tensile stimulation, meaning they need to be pulled into a lengthened position. They need to be healing, and they need to have stimuli while they're healing that resembles what you want to go back to doing. So the big mistake for a lot of folks is they get in this re-injury cycle, especially tendons and fascia, is because they rest, tissues heal shortened, and this happens especially with the plantar fascia. Tissues heal shortened, and they cycle or swim, which does not deform your foot in any way that resembles running. And then they go back to running, and then they forget that they haven't run 5 miles in a month, and they just go back to what their normal running routine is because to them 5 miles a day is normal. But their body it's not acclimated to that. And then they tear those tissues loose because those tissues have healed weak. So figuring out how to keep those tissues loaded in as close manner, in a manner that resembles what you want to be doing. So let's say you're in the early stage of plantar fasciosis and it's super painful. Like you can't even walk 100. You can walk 100. You can't walk 100 yards. Well, then walk 50 yards 3 times a day. You have to load those tissues, and you use kind of those symptoms to figure out. And then you get into, so that's the acute phase. And that's when you're doing like more of the icing, and you're you're wearing, here's the thing, you don't need to buy these gadgets to like hold your foot back to keep the tissue from, because, we all sleep with a foot flopped down. And if you're in the acute phase where the tissue's really angry, you sleep and your tissues heal short while you're in bed. And then you stand up first thing in the morning, you tear everything loose and you just wash, rinse, repeat every day. So you're just picking the scab every morning. So here's the thing. You don't have to buy all these socks and these braces and all that crap. Just put wear a shoe.
Strasbourg sock. She's talking about the Strasbourg
well, there's
sock.
all kinds of different, there's all different things. No, if you just wear a shoe to bed, that keeps your foot, a running shoe. If you are wearing a shoe that has substance, like a running shoe in bed, your foot cannot plantar flex. It stays at neutral.
Yeah, that is interesting.
No, so you just get a clean shoe and wear that to bed. Because a lot of times people are like, oh, I can't handle but some people they'll find a boot that really, really works nicely for them. Because I went through something like a plantar fascia. Like it's kind of a rite of, you start running, you're going to get overuse injuries. It happens.
Can interrupt for a second
anyhow,
because I need to celebrate the fact that we are now getting permission, Steve, to buy brand new running shoes just to wear to bed.
Yeah.
Just to wear to bed. You got your bed shoes.
Injured.
Oh,
your
darn it.
bed shoes.
Yeah.
Only
our new slippers have become focused.
Only if you're injured. And then just the other thing. The other thing about this, Jeff, is I would encourage you to. There's not a one shoe. Like we were talking about terrain.
That's true.
And that. Ideally, your foot needs variety, and variety creates mobility and different neurology, different responses. And so having different shoes for different terrain and different paces. So like a shoe for like a longer distance and more time is generally a shoe that's a little bit more supportive. And had like for somebody that with ankle mobility, a higher drop, where middle distance running, like, kind of, your midweek kind of running, you can wear a shoe that has a little bit less support, a little bit lower drop. And then if you're going to be for your speed work, like what do the track athletes wear? They basically wear slippers with spikes on the bottom. And so having something nice and flexible, and so having that variety that stimulates your tissues in a different way, and then that creates robustness. Like sameness creates weakness.
And
so
interesting you're saying that.
Does that make sense? So
it is, but it's interesting you're saying that, and I apologize for interrupting, but
no, it's all right.
Because the fear that somebody has when they've gone through that is they crave being able to run and being uninjured to run. And so sameness means I get to keep running. And if I try something new means I run a risk. I love the idea of the robustness because I do agree that I've heard it before. Like I should be wearing lots of different types of shoes. I get it. But I'm also very terrified of not being able to run. And so I run this balance, right? Because I have these big goals where I want to make sure I can go run Western States or something to that effect. And I don't want to do anything that will sideline my training. And so we do hit a pattern. And I think a take-home point for me is that regardless, yes, perhaps I should explore other shoes. I'm not going to completely dispel that. But I will also understand that just because I'm not injured doesn't mean I can't focus on my ankle mobility. Just because I'm not injured doesn't mean I shouldn't focus on all these biomechanics of my feet, if you will, while I'm healthy. And I should be able to do that. So I think that's a really good lesson for me as well. Now, I need to switch gears a little bit because I promised at the beginning we were going to talk about race day strategies and end of race stuff. And we have only talked about pre-race stuff, and we have gone for a long time. That being said, earlier on in our conversation, you did share some during race strategy about at Michigan Bluff. You talked about the idea that when runners come in during a race, that if they've got wet feet, because they have 250,000 sweat glands in their feet, they are going to be having wet feet. And so you dry their feet. And earlier on the race, you focus on doing some ointments, not lubes, such as squirrel nut butter and also salty britches are two very popular products that you mentioned, as well as at this point, you will start moving over to maybe doing some tape and drying off their feet with some powders. So you mentioned some race day things already. So that's the good news. I do have a couple other questions about mid-race type of things that you should do. The question we asked, so myself and Steve and Brooklyn, who works with us on putting this podcast together, we talked about blisters, and I'm going to stick on this topic just for a little bit more. And it's this idea of we get a blister, we have a hotspot. So hotspot's gone. We've developed a blister because we couldn't stop. We couldn't make ourselves stop. We made it all the way to Michigan Bluff, even though the thing is just flared up to all get out, right? And it's, who knows what color it's going to be when I get there. But I'm now there with this blister. The question is, will it continue to get worse to the point that it could permanently damage my foot? Or,
No.
right? Or are we really just trying to decide how much pain can I endure? And should I just keep moving? Tricky,
Okay,
huh?
my answer. My answer, of course, is it depends, because there's a lot that this depends on, a lot of variables. So let's just establish this one truth. Never in the history of blisters has one ever gotten better by ignoring it.
Yeah.
It will only get worse. Worse is what you're signing up for if you're ignoring something. And so you have to do the math in your head. Ideally, you always have a little kit in your pack, because you can't, with the proper foot care supplies in it, because you can't count on that happening at all the aid stations. There's still some old, like, antiquated thought processes out there. So, and we're ultra runners. You should be self-sufficient. Have your own stuff. Address it as soon as possible. If something, you're not saving you're saving yourself. I have these conversations at the Michigan Bluff all the time. It's like, just, I know you're worried about, you want your sub 24, but if you let me do this well, you won't have to stop for this until Auburn. Like, I can tell you that with confidence. Just hang. I know this is, and so you have to do that math in your head. Like, how much is this, if I ignore this, like, how far is there to go before the race is over? And you do the math of how much is this going to cumulatively slow me down if I ignore it? Because knowing that it's going to only get worse. And so, if you're 10 miles out from the finish and then freaking leave it and just push through. And if it's not, and you're an ultra runner, you can do that. But if you're a third of the way, if you're day one and you're 200 miler and you're foolish enough to think that you can just limp through, like, why? Now you're just signing up for a lot. Now it's just going to be miserable the rest of the time out there on the course, because you let something get worse. And so that's kind of the math you do in your head. And then, then you can also do the bigger picture thinking of, like, what race is this for me? Like, and also with, like, musculoskeletal injuries, like, you do the math. Like, if I continue, and this is going to continue to make my foot tissue break down and get worse, there's a timeline for healing. So you do the math, and you're like, this is going to affect how long it's going to take me it's going to extend my recovery time from this race. So then you figure out, like, is it worth it for me to take 3 times longer to recover? So you look at your overall race schedule, so that's also kind of math. But really, I would encourage people at all times, address it immediately, because especially if you have a blister, ideally you lance it in a controlled setting so that all it has is, 2 or 4 needle holes in it, and then you cover it so that epidermis is intact. So the dermis, where the blood vessels and the nerves are, does not get exposed. Or you can ignore it, and then the roof of the blister gets torn off, rubbing dirt and debris into the dermis. And now, no matter how much tape you put on, you still
still hurts.
So you just have a much more catastrophic tissue injury. And I've had, like, Jeff, to your question, is from a maceration perspective, which is like warm weather, epidermis being damaged. So that's like blisters and blood blisters. The nerve, permanent damage is not happening, because it's only the top layer, the skin, and the second layer, the dermis, is being affected. Trench foot, which is a term that's being used incorrectly by way too many people. It should be embarrassing. A trench foot is a situation where So maceration is like a general term talking about the epidermis being waterlogged and what happens when that's actually just a general wound care kind of term. You could call it swamp foot if you want something that sounds a little cooler or like a little more hip or fun or something. Trench foot is something that is a completely and totally different situation where you can have permanent injury, because trench foot was named after the World War I soldiers who were in the trenches, and they were in. It's a cold immersion injury where the feet were immersed in water for days, so 3 days or longer, in temperatures of less than 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And the damage there is to the nerves and the blood vessels. And that's where you can have tissue turning black and dying and taking a very long time to heal. So those are two completely different terms. And like calling maceration trench foot is like telling somebody who has low blood sugar that they have diabetes. Like they're completely different terms. I forgot your original question. But anyhow, so maceration, the main thing with maceration is that it makes the epidermis more fragile and prone to injury. And so that's why preventive measures like the skin barrier ointment is you're basically using a hydrophobic layer, like a water repelling layer, to try to keep the deleterious effects of water or sweat on your skin. You're trying to kind of stave that off. So yeah, but never in the history of a blister has one ever improved. But I have had people who have had deeper blood blisters, like at the ball of the foot or the heel, that it took a good 6 months before that area was healed, because that's the dermis, and so the nerves in that one little specific spot were damaged because of the pressure, and it took a little bit of time for those nerves to fully recover. Long answer. Good question.
That's a rough one. Yeah, that's rough.
But yeah, be prepared. Like during the race, just address things. Ideally, you've been prepared. You've got to have prepared well enough. And if you have the proper supplies with you and you address things immediately, or as close to immediately as possible, you're setting yourself up to be in a much better place.
Yeah, I would much rather take care of a hotspot and or blister during between aid stations than wait to get to the aid station and be much worse. And like you said, I'd rather have a couple pinholes in the blister instead of the whole thing ripping off. That's like the worst part.
Yeah. And it's prevention.
Been there on both. But
we had a question about state injuries too, and whether or not you should keep moving forward if you have those, and how do you assess that? But I think your answer is going to be pretty much the same. It's going to be, it depends. And so I don't need to kind of do that, because it does depend really on your long-term view of what your race recovery could look like and what kind of injury you have. And, there's a pain tolerance and whether or not you're creating more damage or not. So it's a very similar type answer, I think, for that as well. Steve and I were talking about another question though, when it comes to race day things. Now, Steve is elite and I am not.
Oh, far no way. I'm like mid to back of the pack, Jeff.
Okay, well, it was fun. So at least for a moment, she didn't know that. So we're both mid to the backpack of the entire group of people that are out there, right? So you at Michigan Bluff and all the other races you volunteered at so far, you are there to see all levels come through, like from those who are at the front to those who are at the back. What are the pros doing differently than those of us commoners?
Well, they're out there for a third of the time.
That's what I
talked
said.
about too. We both talked about.
I mean, there's that. Like they're not out there long enough to have any injury. So like what's in states? What the front runners are finishing in like 15 hours. They don't have enough time. They're not out there long enough. They're already super efficient in the way that they move. And so their risk for injury is really low because they're not out there very long. And like how many of these, it's happened to me multiple times now where you get a really fast, accomplished runner tries to do something different, like set a fastest known time for something where they're going to be out there for days or weeks. And how many times have we heard this story? Oh, my feet hurt. they don't even have a foot plan because they'd never had foot issues because they're fast and they're not out there long enough. And whereas, you look at it's a matter of time. I remember when I ran my first marathon and I was a little embarrassed because my younger brother is more of an elite athlete and he finished like an hour ahead of me. And I was a little, like, well, I mean, I finished and kind of a little embarrassed that, that would reflect poorly on him that his sister's slow. And he's just like, what? He goes, props. Anyhow, it was our hometown marathon because you could sit and like drink margaritas at the finish for the rest of the day. And he's like, these effers have been out there for 5 hours. What the heck? So when you're out there longer, and the people who are, the front runners, this is what they're doing for their vocation, it's the main thing that they're doing. So they're more prepared. They're devoting more time to their training and their preparation and their strategies. The average person in the mid backpack, they have jobs and lives and other things. So it's just a different life balance. So your body's like in a different kind of a place. But I think that's the main difference of why. And so you'll see when you have a front runner who ends up injured or something happens and then they end up taking 20 some hours to finish at states, they have similar things pop up. I'm fixing their feet too, and they actually need a lot of times a little bit more kind of love. They need a little bit because they're not used to being out there. And it's really kind of beautiful to see, like I've seen this multiple times where you get somebody who's a front runner, something goes sideways and they're like, nope, I'm gonna finish this. If it takes me, if I'm 2 minutes and it's props to them, they've decided to just march it in. And just the love of the ultra running community that you witness of just everyone just like, I call it the dolphin maneuver. Like, so when a dolphin is injured, dolphins need to breathe air, right? And so the rest of the pod will surround that dolphin and they'll bring it up to the surface so that it can breathe. And then they'll swim and they're swimming along and they're taking the burden away, by their bodies and the way that they're swimming and they're propelling it forward and they'll bring it up to breathe. And then you see the ultra runners, they just do the dolphin maneuver and they're like man down. And it's just so beautiful. It's such a great sport. Just good. It attracts really quality human beings.
We've talked about this. I think Steve, you and I've talked about this, and I know even with other people I've discussed this as well. Is that when you see somebody who's elite, somebody who's really good at the sport, when they struggle and they still push on and finish, I hate to say it this way, I actually respect that race of theirs almost more than if they go and won it.
Absolutely.
Right.
Just because, not to take anything away from their wins, because I think that's incredible. So if they're hearing this, they are, but if they are, but when they do that, I'm like, you're giving back to the people in the entire pack here when you do this. Like you are giving back, like you are willing to push through the hard moments, and it didn't go your way because most of the people in the middle of the pack and the back of the pack, guess what? Their race probably didn't go exactly like they hoped in their training and they dreamed every day, but they were planning it out either.
Or maybe everything's amazing. And they're doing their PR and they've got this elite runner who's all bummed out. And you're like, hey man, I'm having the best day of my life.
That's true. We're all going to fish in 29 hours together.
And they're super stoked. And so, but at the same time, there's no judgment. Like people, they have to do their own math. Sometimes they can afford to push through, like emotionally. They just need to do that and just respect to dig deep and to, especially with social media, to face like the judgment and then the comments that people like to make who really have no business judging other people. Like we're all doing the best we can with what we got. And if they choose to do that, like it's really kudos to them.
One more question we had. So I'm going to switch to recovery just a little bit because we had a few other questions on this too. One of the things, though, that is helpful to kind of understand is, I've taped my feet, right? And so immediately I'm done with my race. And one of the things we asked one of our guests who's done multiple 200 miles before, his name's Dave Stinchfield. We were talking about taping feet and kind of what you do and some of the concerns we have when you tape your feet and you have these blisters or whatever underneath. Like, how do you get this tape off without tearing up the skin that you've got just covered you try to protect? And so he gave a great tip on how to remove it without any issues. I don't know if you know this, but you probably do. And if not, we're going to maybe teach you something today, Tonya. He has found that if you take a Q-tip with baby oil and you outline the tape with baby oil and stuff and give it just a second to start soaking under, you can pull the tape off with no issues.
Yeah, that's what's used in wound care. There's a product. That's where I'm so nerdy, because I worked in wound care in the physical therapy in the hospital settings. But yeah, there's actually products you can buy that are like adhesive removers. And it's basically like a mineral oil based. But here's the thing: you don't need to take the tape off.
So that's the question.
Just leave it. Seriously, leave it on. If you have, so here's the rule of thumb that I tell that for everyone at the end of a race. I call it counseling and closure, because nobody needs foot care when they're done. But nobody wants the day to end, especially at a big race like States. So I'm always the last person in the medical tent. Like, the docs are all gone and I'm still sitting there with my little gaggle of people, because we're just not ready for the day to end. And so here's the rule of thumb. If the tissue is compromised underneath, leave it on. Give your skin a day it's been through enough. Like, the tape does not need to come off. Leave it if the tissue is damaged underneath. And then, like, if it's really damaged, if, like, let's say you had a blister, and then you do the math. Like, and so if you had a blister where the roof was torn off and the dermis was exposed and it's a mess under there, leave the tape on until it wants to come off. And then all you do is you just, you're taking your showers and you're doing Epsom salt soaks and all that stuff post-race for your recovery. And then when the edges of the tape peel up, you just trim them down, and the tape will come off when it's ready. That's really the best way to attend to do the math on what to do with the tape. If the tissue it's not compromised, I still just leave it on for that, at least until take your shower, do all the thing. Your skin's been through enough. Just leave it on until the next day. It takes a little bit of time for your tissues, your skin to kind of rebound from all the trauma that they've been through from being so sweat soaked. So it's kind of tenuous. Like, let's say you got some ball of the foot tape on there, and you don't have a blister, everything's fine. You can peel that off, totally fine. But if it's really strong, if you kind of tug on it and it wants to stay, why don't you just leave it?
Yeah, that's interesting to me. I know that I think most of us try to wrap up our race and try to close it out as quick as possible. And so we're thinking clean up everything and be done. But
you can take a shower with the tape on.
But I would worry that I would be infected.
No.
I would worry, I know, but that's just my brain. My brain tells me that.
No, here's the thing. Your epidermis, it's venous blood flow. Like, the chance my mindset has like switched. Like, it's this pendulum has swung. I've worked with so many doctors. Here's the thing. The chance, unless you've really ground a ton of dirt into and you ignored a blister for 300 miles, the chance of like infection happening is so slim. It's not something that you don't want to think about. But here's the thing. I've worked with so many medical doctors who have a much higher level of knowledge about like risk for infection and all that. Here's a story from Western States this year. So we're all hands on deck. Like, I'm pulling in coaches from CTS. They've got an athlete, and I'm like, come on, here, bring it. Like, here, follow me. Because we're trying to get people out of the chairs as fast as possible. Passerbys, no. Like, we had some medical volunteers. They thought that they were going to, because the medical stays in medical, and foot care people do foot care. We usually send the medical. If we assess somebody as medical, send them back. But there's I conscripted. I'm desperate. I've got blisters on both feet that need lanced, and we're trying to get stuff done in a timely manner. And so I'm like, I look up and I see a surgeon, and I'm like, hey, I need your help. And so he's like, sure, what do you need? I'm like, you lance that one, I'll lance this one. And he reaches into my kit and he picks up the scalpel that I just used on the previous runner. And I'm like, no, that's dirty. And he looks at the foot And he looks at the scalpel, and he looks back at the foot. He goes, "What's that?"
Oh, geez. That's awesome. Well,
So yeah, leaving the tape on is actually protecting the skin. I don't see why you need to take it off. Your skin's been through enough. If it comes off easy, take it off. If you really are insistent on taking it off and you want to mitigate the damage you might cause, the baby oil trick is fantastic. But you just need to know what's going on underneath there.
I think that's a really good piece of advice. And so
Yeah.
I know.
Oh, and
Go ahead.
Coban. I use zero adhesives after a race. I use Coban is the brand name. If you go to like the store, it's like self-adherent wrap. Like, if you give blood, if you give blood, they put the little cotton ball and then that bandage. It's that stuff. That is what you use after a race. Self-adherent tape, self-adherent because it adheres to itself. And then what's beautiful about that after a race is you're going to want to do some post-race recovery stuff, like Epsom salt bath soaks is really good for your body or your feet specifically to help those tissues kind of recover from being waterlogged for so long. And so what you can do is, if you still have you've got some sensitive areas or you've got the skin has been damaged and the tape fell off or it came off or you took a shower and it kind of fell off, but you still want to protect that skin, the best thing to do is just use some Coban because it can come off, you can put it back on, and so it's safe. You're not going to cause any more tissue trauma. Your tissue has had enough. You don't need any more adhesives. After a race is the only time to use a hydrocolloid dressing or a blister patch. And those are magical if you use them in the proper setting, which is a dry, controlled environment, so that would be after a race. So let's say you have a blister on like the back of your heel or on the back of your heel or some type of your foot. Those hydrocolloid bandages, they're oval and they're usually called blister patches. You need to put them on properly. If you put them on properly, then they'll last the life of the healing time that the blister needs, 5 to 7 days. Those are designed to stay on until the blister is healed. They're designed to absorb the serous fluid that is produced as it's healing and from the exposed dermis, but you have to do it properly. So you need to make sure the skin is clean and dry that's surrounding the blister. And so I would even use like an alcohol wipe around the tissue that the bandage is going to adhere to. And then you put it in your palm, between your two palms, warm it up before you put it on. So get it nice and warm with your body temperature. Make sure you look at like the directions or like there's the little coverings that you need to kind of peel off. Make sure you know which side is down and which side is up so that you don't want to handle it with your fingers at all. You want to peel off the part that sticks to the skin without touching it at all and then put it directly on where you need to have it on. And then you hold it on, hold your hand, like cup it on the bandage, the patch for a good 30 seconds. And so that would be about 5 breaths. So you're like 10 or 12 breaths a minute. So like 30 seconds. If you do that, if you're really perspicuous, which is like attention to detail, if you apply that bandage properly, it will stay on the life of a blister. It will stay on through bathing, showering, going to Disney World, all the things. And so that's the only time to use those. But I would never put those on like immediately after the race. Put it on after you've gotten home. You put the Coban on after the race, cover the damaged tissue, do all the things, drive home, get on a plane or whatever. And then when you're home, and you have a minute, and your skin has had a chance to kind of rebound, and so that surrounding skin has kind of recovered a little bit from being bathed in sweat for however long it was, and you have time to properly apply that blister patch. That's the time to do that.
That's awesome,
Tonya. That's fantastic. So you actually pre-answered most of our recovery long-term questions anyway. So I want to thank you for that. Now, normally we do at this portion of our show called Coach's Corner, but for the sake of time, we're not going to pull that off today. So Beth,
I
you
don't think
submitted a
so.
question. We're gonna pull that the next time. But Tonya, thank you for all of the information. This was fantastic. For those who are listening, there is no Easter egg, and this Easter egg is fine, whatever you want it to make it be. Just
Say, I got to
be
fix
sure
my feet. Just put that at
Fix
the
my
end. Put
feet.
that on your
Yeah.
story. I got to fix my
But make
feet.
sure, you got to do something. You definitely have to do something and share the episode and everything. But Tonya, you mentioned earlier that you have got a YouTube channel and you're also on Instagram. So we're going to include both those links in the show notes. But do you have for your Instagram channel, can you tell us our Instagram page, what is your handle for there just for
Instagram is Tonya K. Olson.
Tonya K.
Okay,
Olson?
hang on.
So
Wait,
they
hang
can look.
on. Hang on. All right. It's
It
either
is.
Tonya K. Olson or yeah. So
Tonya K.
Tonya K.
Olson,
Olson
PT.
DPT. DPT.
DPT.
Tonya K. Olson DPT
DPT.
for Instagram. And then YouTube is Tonya K. Olson. And then I have a website that I'm working on that has some
Nice.
educational resources on there. Eventually, I'm going to have like a foot care certification track, a whole bunch of stuff.
Nice.
I just need to get my act together. It's under my foot care, my relatively new foot care brand, which is Dr. Tonya Foot Care. So if you go to drtonyafootcare.com, you'll see a couple of courses up there. I've got one that I need to finish tomorrow. And then there will be continuing resources available on that website.
Awesome.
But I'm trying to do better about posting more about like different foot care products. And I apparently need to do one about the doming foot short
You
foot
do.
exercise one.
Yeah, I think short foot exercises are great. But
Yeah.
so thank you for that. So make sure you send me an email with the links and everything. We'll include those in our show notes.
Sure.
For
Yeah,
those
yeah.
who are listening, they can have that. And I think it'll be great because I think everybody should be following you, learning from you. I think if they don't win the book, they should be buying the book. I think there's a lot of great
Absolutely.
information in it. And if you ever run Western States and you're listening to this, make sure you reach out to Tonya in Michigan Bluff. I know I expect to see her next year when I somehow get in.
Knock
But-
wood, hopefully.
Knock on wood, right? Yeah, but one day I'll get in. That's the goal. So I'll look forward to meeting you in person as well. So again, thank you for taking the time spending with us. I know it's a little bit longer than we kind of expected. I appreciate your patience
That's
with
all
us
right.
as we had a lot to talk about. And for those listening, thank you for taking the time to download the episode and listen to us and be a part of this journey with us on Blueprint to Ultra. We appreciate you. Make sure you leave us a comment, leave us a review, but more importantly, share the story with this episode and get yourself a copy
Absolutely.
of Fixing Your Feet. So thank you so much for listening, and we will see you guys later. See ya. Bye now.
See you guys.